October the 29th, 2025. The moment had arrived. For weeks, astronomers around the world had been tracking 3i Atlas as it approached its closest point to the Sun, watching and waiting to see what would happen when this mysterious interstellar visitor reached perihelion. What they witnessed defied every prediction, every model, every assumption about how objects from beyond our solar system should behave. At exactly 4:37 UTC, something unprecedented occurred. 3i Atlas, which had been following a perfectly predictable gravitational path for months, suddenly changed course. Not by much in cosmic terms, but enough to send shockwaves through every observatory, every space agency, and every scientist who had been monitoring this enigmatic object. The course correction wasn't random, it wasn't chaotic, it was precise, deliberate, and timed to perfection. For 90 minutes, 3i Atlas accelerated away from the Sun with a force that should have been impossible at its distance. Then, as abruptly as it began, the acceleration stopped. The object resumed its ballistic trajectory, but now on a completely different path. Tonight, we're going to examine what really happened during those crucial 90 minutes. We're going to look at the data that has left NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory scrambling for explanations. We're going to explore why this course change has forced scientists to confront possibilities they never wanted to consider. And most importantly, we're going to address the question everyone is asking. Where is 3i Atlas heading now? If mysteries like this captivate you the way they captivate me, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what you think about these extraordinary developments. Before we dive into the specifics of what happened on October 29th, we need to understand just how unusual 3i Atlas had been from the very beginning. This wasn't your typical comet or asteroid. From the moment of its discovery, everything about this object challenged our understanding of how interstellar visitors should behave. Most comets that approach the Sun follow predictable patterns. As they get closer to our star, solar heating causes volatile materials like water ice and carbon dioxide to sublimate, creating the characteristic glowing coma and tail that we associate with these cosmic wanderers. This outgassing process also creates small but measurable forces that nudge the comet slightly off its gravitational path. Astronomers call these non-gravitational accelerations, and they're completely normal for active comets. But 3i Atlas broke this fundamental rule. For weeks leading up to perihelion, the object showed clear signs of activity. Telescopes detected the telltale signatures of gas emission, particularly carbon, dioxide and other volatile compounds streaming away from its nucleus. The spectroscopic evidence was undeniable. This object was outgassing just like any other comet should. Yet despite all this visible activity, 3i Atlas refused to deviate from its predicted path, not even by a millimeter per second. The object moved through space as if it were a solid chunk of inert rock, completely unaffected by the forces that should have been pushing it around. This contradiction puzzled scientists for months. NASA's Solar System Dynamics Group, which specializes in tracking the precise movements of celestial bodies, noted this anomaly in their internal reports. The phrase they used was clinical but profound. No detectable non-gravitational parameters required. In the language of orbital mechanics, this was like saying a rocket was firing its engines without moving. The physics simply didn't add up. When a comet releases gas, that gas has to go somewhere. As it streams away from the nucleus, it creates an equal and opposite reaction, pushing back on the comet itself. This is basic Newtonian physics, as fundamental as the law that governs how rockets work in space. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. But 3i Atlas seemed to be exempt from this universal law. It was releasing material without experiencing any recoil whatsoever. The object maintained its trajectory with mathematical precision, as if something was actively compensating for the forces that should have been affecting it. This behavior was so unusual that some scientists began to wonder if they were witnessing an entirely new category of celestial object. Perhaps 3i Atlas represented some exotic form of matter that behaved according to principles we hadn't yet discovered. Or maybe its internal structure was somehow perfectly balanced, with gas jets emerging in exactly opposite directions to cancel each other out. The symmetry theory seemed plausible at first. If the nucleus was venting material uniformly in all directions, The various thrust vectors might indeed cancel out, leaving the object's trajectory unchanged, but this explanation required an almost impossible level of geometric perfection. Comet nuclei are typically irregular, chaotic structures riddled with fractures and weak spots. The odds of achieving perfect symmetrical outgassing across such a surface were astronomically small. As October progressed and perihelion approached, the mystery only deepened. The Subaru telescope in Hawaii detected an unusual chemical composition in the gas surrounding 3I Atlas. Instead of the water vapor that dominates most comets at this distance from the Sun, the spectrum showed heavy concentrations of carbon dioxide and other more exotic compounds. This suggested that the object had formed in an extremely cold environment, possibly in the outer reaches of another star system. But even this unusual chemistry couldn't explain the lack of non-gravitational acceleration. If anything, carbon dioxide should have made the problem worse. This gas sublimates at lower temperatures than water ice, meaning it should have been more active, not less. The forces acting on 3I Atlas should have been stronger, not weaker. Meanwhile, the Sun itself was becoming increasingly active. Solar cycle 25 was approaching its maximum, and by late October our star was unleashing a series of powerful flares and coronal mass ejections. On October 28th, just one day before perihelion, the Sun released an X-class flare that sent streams of charged particles racing across the solar system. This solar activity created ideal conditions for any object with conductive properties to interact electromagnetically with the solar wind. If 3I Atlas contained metallic elements, the increased particle bombardment might have triggered some kind of electromagnetic response. But once again, the object remained stubbornly stable, showing no reaction to the energetic environment surrounding it. The final 24 hours before perihelion were marked by a subtle but noticeable increase in brightness. The European Southern Observatory's automated monitoring systems flagged what they termed a nonlinear brightening trend. This wasn't the explosive outburst that sometimes occurs when comets approach the Sun, but rather a steady, controlled increase in luminosity. To the teams monitoring 3I Atlas around the clock, this brightness increase felt ominous. It suggested that something was building beneath the surface, some process that had been accumulating energy and was now reaching a critical threshold. The question was whether this build-up would result in a dramatic fragmentation event, a violent outburst, or something else entirely. As October 29th dawned, observatories across multiple continents had their instruments trained on the coordinates where 3I Atlas was predicted to reach perihelion. The NASA Near-Earth Object Coordination Center had established a real-time data-sharing protocol with facilities in Chile, Spain, Hawaii, and Australia. Everyone wanted to witness what would happen when this enigmatic object reached its closest approach to the Sun. For the first few hours after perihelion, everything appeared normal. The calculated trajectory matched the observed position within the expected margins of error. The object was behaving exactly as the gravitational models predicted. The brightness had stabilized, and the spectroscopic readings showed continued but steady outgassing activity. Then, at 4:37 UTC, something changed. The first indication came from a small discrepancy in the astrometric data from the Mauna Kea Observatory. The position readings were showing a systematic drift, subtle but consistent. At first, the analysts assumed this was atmospheric distortion or a calibration error. These things happen frequently in precision astronomy. But when similar discrepancies appeared in data from completely different telescopes on different continents, the mood in control rooms around the world shifted from routine monitoring to intense focus. Something was actually happening to 3I Atlas, something that was causing it to deviate from its predicted path in real time. Over the next 6 hours, the deviation grew from a barely perceptible drift into an unmistakable course change. Multiple independent observatories confirmed that 3I Atlas was accelerating away from the Sun at a rate that defied every known model of cometary behavior. The magnitude of this acceleration was enormous by the standards of natural objects, roughly 20 times stronger than what solar heating should have been capable of producing at that distance. What made this event even more extraordinary was its precision. The acceleration wasn't chaotic or random, as you might expect from a natural outgassing event. Instead, it followed a smooth, controlled curve that looked almost engineered in its perfection. The force ramped up gradually, maintained a steady peak for approximately 90 minutes, then decayed symmetrically back to zero. This wasn't the signature of an explosion or a violent eruption. This was the signature of something far more controlled and deliberate. The acceleration profile looked disturbingly similar to what spacecraft engineers would recognize as a planned propulsive maneuver, complete with ignition, steady burn, and clean shutdown. As news of this unprecedented event began to spread through the scientific community, one name kept coming up in hushed conversations: Avi Loeb, the Harvard astrophysicist who had spent years arguing that we should take seriously the possibility of artificial objects visiting our solar system. Months earlier, Loeb had written that if 3I Atlas were anything other than a natural comet, perihelion would be the optimal moment for a trajectory adjustment. His reasoning was based on fundamental principles of orbital mechanics. At perihelion, an object is moving at its fastest velocity and experiencing the strongest gravitational field. Any propulsive maneuver performed at this point would achieve maximum efficiency, providing the greatest change in trajectory for the least expenditure of energy. It was exactly what a sophisticated spacecraft would do to alter its course through the solar system. The fact that 3I Atlas had executed what appeared to be a textbook orbital maneuver at precisely the moment Loeb had predicted sent ripples of unease through the astronomical community. This wasn't just an unexplained event anymore. This was an event that someone had essentially forecasted based on the assumption of intelligent control. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the entire episode was what happened immediately after the 90-minute acceleration period ended. 3I Atlas didn't continue to show signs of unusual activity. It didn't fragment or develop a chaotic brightness pattern. Instead, it simply returned to normal ballistic motion, as if whatever had caused the acceleration had accomplished its purpose and then switched itself off. This clean termination was perhaps the strongest evidence that something deliberate had occurred. Natural processes don't typically start and stop with such precision. They fade gradually as energy dissipates or fuel runs out. But the acceleration of 3I Atlas ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving behind only a permanently altered trajectory and a scientific community struggling to make sense of what they had witnessed. The immediate aftermath of the acceleration event revealed something that made the scientific establishment even more uncomfortable than the course change itself. Every telescope that had been tracking 3I Atlas continued to monitor the object as it moved away from perihelion, expecting to see the typical signs of a comet that had just undergone a major outgassing episode. What they found instead was an object that looked more composed and stable than it had before the event occurred. In the days following October 29th, spectroscopic analysis from the Very Large Telescope in Chile showed that the chemical signature of 3I Atlas had fundamentally changed. The carbon dioxide emissions that had been so prominent during the approach to perihelion had dropped to barely detectable levels. In their place, observers found faint traces of metallic compounds, including what appeared to be nickel and iron oxides. These weren't the substances you'd expect to find streaming from a typical icy comet nucleus. Even stranger was the behavior of the coma, that fuzzy envelope of gas and dust that surrounds active comets. Instead of expanding outward, as would be normal after such a significant release of material, the coma around 3I Atlas appeared to be contracting. High-resolution images from the Hubble Space Telescope showed that the particles weren't dispersing randomly into space as they should have been. Instead, they seemed to be following organized patterns, as if influenced by some kind of internal magnetic field. This organized particle behavior was unprecedented in cometary science. Natural comets don't generate magnetic fields strong enough to control their own ejector. The only objects known to exhibit such characteristics are spacecraft with active electromagnetic systems, or celestial bodies with substantial metallic cores. Neither explanation fit comfortably with what 3I Atlas was supposed to be. Dr. Eleanor Moreno, a plasma physicist who had been brought in to analyze the electromagnetic data from the event, made an observation that would haunt the investigation for months to come. The acceleration curve she had recorded didn't just look engineered, it matched almost perfectly with the thrust profiles of ion propulsion systems used on deep space missions like the Dawn spacecraft. The smooth ramp-up, steady burn phase and clean cutoff were virtually identical to what you'd expect from a controlled, propulsive maneuver. When Moreno presented her findings to a closed meeting at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the room fell silent. Here was a propulsion expert, someone who had spent 15 years studying how spacecraft move through space, telling them that an object supposedly made of ice and rock had just performed a maneuver that looked indistinguishable from artificial propulsion technology. The timing of the acceleration made the situation even more puzzling. The burst of thrust hadn't begun randomly during the approach to perihelion. It had started within 4 minutes of the exact moment when 3I Atlas reached its closest point to the Sun. This wasn't the gradual, chaotic release of pressure you'd expect from natural outgassing. This was precision timing that suggested either remarkable coincidence or deliberate planning. NASA's internal reports began using increasingly careful language to describe what had happened. Terms like transient acceleration event and non-gravitational impulse replaced the earlier, more confident descriptions of standard cometary activity. The bureaucratic euphemisms couldn't hide the fact that the agency's top orbital mechanics specialists were struggling to find any natural explanation that fit the observed data. Meanwhile, independent tracking stations around the world were confirming what the major observatories had detected. 3I Atlas had indeed changed course, and the change was substantial. The object's trajectory had shifted by several degrees, sending it on a path that would take it well above the plane of the solar system. Instead of following the relatively crowded ecliptic where most planets and debris reside, 3I Atlas was heading toward one of the quietest regions of interplanetary space. This trajectory change wasn't random either. Orbital analysts noted that the new path was remarkably clean, avoiding potential gravitational perturbations from the outer planets and steering clear of the asteroid belt. If you wanted to design an exit route from the solar system that minimized interference and maximized efficiency, this is exactly the kind of trajectory you would choose. The implications of this course change extended far beyond academic curiosity. For the first time in recorded history, humanity had witnessed an interstellar object alter its trajectory while under direct observation. Every comet, asteroid, and space rock previously studied had followed predictable paths governed by gravity and the random forces of outgassing. 3I Atlas had broken free from those constraints, demonstrating a level of control that challenged fundamental assumptions about how natural objects behave in space. The data from those crucial 90 minutes told a story that made conventional scientists deeply uncomfortable. The acceleration had been directed precisely along the object's velocity vector, maximizing the change in orbital energy. The duration had been exactly long enough to achieve the desired trajectory modification without wasting energy on unnecessary thrust. The cutoff had been instantaneous, with no gradual decay or random fluctuations. These weren't the characteristics of a chaotic natural process. They were the hallmarks of an optimized engineering solution, executed with the kind of precision that human spacecraft aspire to but rarely achieve. The uncomfortable truth was that 3I Atlas had just demonstrated better orbital mechanics than most of our own space missions. As word of the course change spread through astronomical circles, comparisons to Oumuamua became inevitable. That first confirmed interstellar visitor had also shown unexplained acceleration, though much subtler and over a longer period. Now, 8 years later, a second interstellar object had not only repeated the pattern, but had done so with far greater intensity and precision. The parallel was troubling, because it suggested that whatever had affected 3I Atlas wasn't unique. If two separate objects from the depths of space had both demonstrated non-gravitational acceleration under human observation, then perhaps such behavior was more common than anyone had imagined. Perhaps the universe was full of objects that moved according to principles we didn't understand, following rules we had never discovered. Avi Loeb, who had faced significant criticism for suggesting that Oumuamua might have been artificial, found himself vindicated in ways he had never expected. His prediction that 3I Atlas would execute a maneuver at perihelion had been based on the assumption that the object possessed some form of guidance system. The fact that this prediction had come true with such remarkable accuracy forced even his harshest critics to reconsider their positions. But Loeb himself remained cautious about claiming victory. In interviews following the event, he emphasized that the goal wasn't to prove alien technology, but to encourage rigorous investigation of anomalous phenomena. Whether 3I Atlas was natural or artificial mattered less than the fact that it had revealed gaps in our understanding of how objects behave in space. The scientific community found itself divided into two increasingly polarized camps. On one side were those who insisted that natural explanations must exist, even if they hadn't been discovered yet. Perhaps 3I Atlas represented a new class of interstellar object, with exotic properties that current models couldn't account for. Maybe its internal structure was so unusual that it could store and release energy in ways that mimicked artificial propulsion. On the other side were those who had begun to accept that the simplest explanation might also be the most disturbing one. The object had behaved exactly as you would expect a sophisticated spacecraft to behave when executing a precisely planned trajectory correction. The acceleration profile, the timing, the direction, and the clean termination all pointed toward intelligent, control rather than random physics. Between these two camps lay a growing number of scientists who found themselves unable to choose either explanation with confidence. The data was too clean to dismiss as natural coincidence, but the implications of artificial origin were too profound to accept without extraordinary evidence. They found themselves trapped in an uncomfortable middle ground, acknowledging that something unprecedented had occurred, while remaining unable to categorize what that something actually was. As 3I Atlas continued its journey away from the Sun, now on its altered trajectory toward the outer solar system, the questions it had raised refused to fade. The object itself was becoming fainter with each passing day, soon to disappear beyond the reach of even our most powerful telescopes. But the memory of those 90 minutes would persist, challenging our assumptions about the nature of the cosmos and our place within it. The course change had accomplished something that decades of academic debate could not. It had forced humanity to confront the possibility that we might not be alone in our ability to navigate between the stars. Whether that possibility represented advanced physics or advanced intelligence remained an open question, but the question itself had become impossible to ignore. Impossible to ignore. In the weeks that followed the perihelion event, a different kind of investigation began. While the world's attention remained focused on the dramatic course change itself, a small group of researchers started noticing something far more subtle, but equally disturbing. They weren't looking at 3I Atlas anymore, because by then the object had faded beyond optical detection. Instead, they were examining what it had left behind. The first hint came from the Atacama Large Millimeter Array in Chile, the same facility that had been monitoring radio emissions during the perihelion passage. When technicians performed their routine data analysis several weeks after the event, they discovered something that shouldn't have existed. Buried in the background noise were 3 distinct signal peaks, each lasting approximately 3 minutes, spaced exactly 6 days apart. The signals weren't strong enough to be called transmissions, but they were far too structured to be random interference. The frequency was 266.4 GHz, just slightly offset from the known emission line of carbon monoxide. More troubling was the modulation pattern within each signal. When analysed through algorithms designed for pulsar detection, the peak showed a rhythmic structure with a 3.2 harmonic ratio, the same mathematical relationship found in certain orbital resonances and, disturbingly, in spacecraft telemetry beacons. Dr. Sarah Chen, the ALMA project scientist who first noticed the anomaly, initially assumed it was instrumental error. Radio telescopes are sensitive instruments, and spurious signals can emerge from electronic interference, atmospheric conditions, or calibration drift. But when she cross-referenced the timestamps with data from other observatories, she found something that made her hands shake as she typed her report. The Canary Islands Observatory had detected corresponding signals at the same times, though much fainter. When corrected for the Doppler shift caused by Earth's motion, the two datasets aligned perfectly. If this had been local interference, each telescope would have recorded different patterns. Instead, they were seeing the same phenomenon from different vantage points, which meant the source was astronomical, not terrestrial. The working theory was that these signals represented some kind of electromagnetic wake left by 3I Atlas as it departed the inner solar system. This concept violated several principles of physics as currently understood. Objects don't typically leave coherent radio emissions trailing behind them unless they're actively generating electromagnetic fields. Rocks and ice don't create organized patterns in the radio spectrum that persist for weeks after passage. NASA's Deep Space Network conducted a series of targeted observations toward the object's predicted position, though by then 3I Atlas was far too distant for optical tracking. The results were classified as inconclusive in official reports, but leaked communications suggested that the Goldstone facility had detected what they termed structured interference consistent with reflection patterns. This implied that something was still scattering radio waves in an organized fashion, even though the source should have been completely inert. The Parker Solar Probe, which had been measuring solar wind conditions during the same period, added another piece to the puzzle. Its data log showed a minor disturbance in plasma density roughly 2 days after the perihelion event. The disturbance was tiny, barely above the noise threshold, but its direction matched 3I Atlas's outbound trajectory with remarkable precision. More significantly, the timing correlated almost exactly with the first ALMA detection. This suggested that whatever was creating the radio signals was also interacting with the solar wind in measurable ways. Natural objects don't typically leave organized disturbances in the interplanetary medium unless they're actively charged or magnetic. The Parker data implied that 3I Atlas, or something associated with it, was continuing to affect its environment long after the visible acceleration event had ended. The implications of this electromagnetic trail were profound and troubling. If the signals were real rather than instrumental artifacts, they represented the first evidence of sustained activity from an interstellar object after it had supposedly returned to inert ballistic motion. The pattern suggested some form of ongoing process, whether natural or artificial, that was generating coherent emissions at regular intervals. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a plasma physicist at the European Space Agency, proposed that the signals might represent a previously unknown form of electromagnetic coupling between fast-moving objects and the interplanetary medium. Her model suggested that under certain conditions, a conductive body moving through the solar wind could create resonant oscillations that persist for extended periods. However, the energy requirements for such sustained oscillations exceeded what any known natural process could provide. Alternative explanations focused on the possibility of delayed outgassing events. Perhaps 3I Atlas contained volatile materials that were being released in timed bursts as the object cooled and contracted after its close solar encounter. This could theoretically create periodic changes in the object's electromagnetic signature, leading to the observed radio patterns. But this theory faced significant problems. The signals weren't decaying in intensity as you would expect from a cooling object gradually losing material. Instead, they maintained consistent strength across all 3 detections before disappearing entirely. Natural processes typically show exponential decay patterns, not the sharp cutoff observed in the ALMA data. The most unsettling aspect of the electromagnetic trail was its apparent termination. The final signal was detected in late December 2025, after which the radio emissions ceased completely. There was no gradual fade, no slow weakening that would indicate a natural process running out of energy. The signal simply stopped, as if someone had turned off a switch. This clean termination mirrored the behavior of the acceleration event itself. Both phenomena had started precisely, operated consistently, and ended abruptly. The pattern suggested a level of control and timing that natural processes rarely exhibit. Random physical events tend to begin and end messily, with irregular variations and gradual transitions. The electromagnetic signals from 3I Atlas showed none of these characteristics. Meanwhile, independent tracking efforts were yielding their own disturbing results. A consortium of amateur astronomers, funded partly by private foundations and quietly supported by members of the Galileo project, had continued monitoring the region where 3I Atlas was predicted to be travelling. Their equipment wasn't powerful enough to detect the object itself, but they were searching for any traces of continued activity. What they found defied easy explanation. Using a network of small radio telescopes distributed across 3 continents, they detected faint but persistent interference patterns that seemed to pulse in rhythm with no known astronomical phenomenon. The signals were too weak for detailed analysis, but their regularity was unmistakable. Something was generating electromagnetic disturbances along the path that 3I Atlas had taken, even though the object itself was supposedly inert and invisible. The amateur network's findings never received official acknowledgement from major space agencies, but their data was quietly studied by several research groups. The consensus among those who examined the evidence was troubling. The signals were real, they were artificial in appearance, and they suggested that 3I Atlas remained active in ways that challenge fundamental assumptions about how interstellar objects behave. These discoveries coincided with a broader shift in how the scientific community approached the entire 3I Atlas event. The initial focus on the perihelion acceleration was giving way to a more comprehensive investigation, that encompassed the object's entire passage through the solar system. Researchers began to realize that the 90-minute course change might have been just the most visible manifestation of something far more complex. Archives from multiple observatories were reanalyzed using advanced algorithms designed to detect subtle patterns in noise. This data mining effort revealed additional anomalies that had been overlooked during the initial observations. Tiny variations in brightness that followed mathematical progressions rather than random fluctuations. Spectroscopic readings that showed periodic changes in chemical composition. Radio emissions that pulsed in harmony with the object's rotation period. Each individual anomaly could be explained away as instrumental error or natural variation, but taken together, they painted a picture of an object that was far more active and organized than any natural interstellar visitor should have been. The evidence suggested that 3I Atlas had been generating structured signals and controlled responses throughout its entire journey through the inner solar system. The most disturbing realization was that humanity had almost certainly missed most of these signals during the initial observations. The focus on visible light astronomy and conventional spectroscopy had blinded researchers to the electromagnetic complexity of what they were studying. If 3I Atlas had indeed been transmitting information or executing programmed behaviors, the bulk of that activity had gone undetected simply because no one had known to look for it. This recognition led to urgent discussions about improving detection protocols for future interstellar visitors. The lesson from 3I Atlas was clear. These objects might be far more sophisticated than their appearance suggests. Any future investigations would need to employ the full spectrum of observational techniques, from radio astronomy to gravitational wave detection, to have any hope of understanding what they were actually encountering. As 2026 progressed, the electromagnetic trail from 3I Atlas became a subject of intense but quiet study within select scientific circles. Papers were drafted but not published, conferences were held but not publicized, and data was shared through encrypted channels rather than open journals. The implications of the findings were too significant and too uncertain for public release, but too important to ignore entirely. The trail represented the first potential evidence of sustained artificial activity from an interstellar object. Whether that activity was the result of advanced natural processes or genuine technology remained hotly debated, but the very existence of organized electromagnetic emissions from such an object was unprecedented in the history of astronomy. More troubling was the implication that 3I Atlas had been communicating, or at least transmitting information during its passage through the solar system. The structured nature of the radio signals suggested encoding of some kind, though no one had been able to decipher any meaningful content. The possibility that humanity had been observed and possibly evaluated by an intelligence from another star system was no longer confined to science fiction speculation. The electromagnetic trail also raised questions about other interstellar visitors that might have passed through the solar system undetected. If 3I Atlas had left such clear traces of its passage, how many similar objects might have visited in the past without anyone noticing? The implications suggested that the galaxy might be far more populated and active than humanity had ever imagined, with artificial or semi-artificial objects regularly transiting between star systems on missions we could barely comprehend. As the signals faded into background noise, and 3I Atlas itself disappeared beyond the reach of human observation, the questions it had raised continued to reverberate through the scientific community. The electromagnetic trail had provided tantalizing evidence that interstellar space might be filled with active, intelligent objects pursuing agendas that intersected only briefly with human awareness. The universe had revealed itself to be stranger and more purposeful than anyone had dared to imagine. The electromagnetic trail left by 3I Atlas represented just the beginning of what would become the most significant shift in astronomical thinking since the discovery of exoplanets. As 2026 unfolded, the implications of those structured radio signals began to cascade through multiple scientific disciplines, forcing researchers to reconsider not just what they had observed, but what they might have been missing all along. The Vera Rubin Observatory, which had begun full operations in early 2027, started detecting interstellar objects at an unprecedented rate. Within its first 3 months of operation, 6 new candidates were identified and confirmed. This represented a dramatic increase from the historical average of perhaps 1 detection per decade. The sudden surge in discoveries raised uncomfortable questions about whether these visitors had always been present in such numbers, simply undetected by less sophisticated instruments, or whether something fundamental had changed in the flow of objects through our cosmic neighbourhood. Each new detection was subjected to the enhanced observation protocols developed in response to 3i Atlas. Multi-wavelength surveys, electromagnetic monitoring, and continuous tracking from discovery to departure became standard procedure. The results were sobering. While most of these new visitors followed predictable gravitational trajectories, a disturbing number showed subtle anomalies that echoed the behaviour patterns first observed in 3i Atlas. Object C2027L3, detected in March of that year, exhibited a small but measurable course correction just after its perihelion passage. The deviation was minor compared to 3i Atlas, barely registering above the noise threshold of orbital calculations. But the timing was identical, occurring at the precise moment when solar gravitational assist would provide maximum efficiency for any trajectory change. The pattern was becoming uncomfortably familiar. When Avi Loeb was asked about this new detection during a brief interview, his response sent ripples through the astronomical community. "Sometimes confirmation doesn't arrive all at once," he said with a slight smile. "It arrives like a knock that echoes." The metaphor was apt. Each new anomalous detection seemed to reinforce the unsettling implications of what had been witnessed with 3i Atlas, building a case through repetition rather than dramatic revelation. The trajectory analysis for C2027L3 revealed another disturbing parallel. After its minor course correction, the object was following a path that would eventually take it toward the same general region of space where both 3i Atlas and Oumuamua had disappeared. The convergence wasn't exact, but it was close enough to suggest some form of coordination or common destination. 3 separate interstellar visitors arriving years apart, all departing toward the same quadrant of the galaxy. This apparent coordination prompted the Galileo project to launch its most ambitious observation campaign to date. Rather than waiting for objects to be discovered by chance, they implemented an automated alert system designed to flag any new interstellar entry in real time. The goal was comprehensive monitoring from the moment of detection through final departure, ensuring that no aspect of future visits would go unrecorded. The system paid dividends almost immediately. When the next confirmed interstellar visitor was detected in May 2027, designated 4i Kepler, the full observational protocol was deployed within hours. This time, researchers were ready with radio telescopes, infrared sensors, spectroscopic arrays, and even gravitational wave detectors, all coordinated through a global network that shared data instantaneously. What they found was both reassuring and deeply troubling. 4i Kepler behaved exactly as a natural interstellar object should. Its trajectory remained perfectly ballistic throughout its passage. Its composition matched theoretical predictions for objects formed in the outer regions of distant stellar systems. Its brightness variations followed the expected patterns for a tumbling inactive nucleus. By every measure, it was precisely what scientists had hoped all interstellar visitors would be. But the very normalcy of 4i Kepler made the anomalous behaviour of its predecessors even more difficult to dismiss. Here was proof that natural interstellar objects could be detected and studied without revealing inexplicable behaviours. The fact that 3i Atlas, Oumuamua, and C2027L3 had all deviated from these normal patterns suggested that their anomalies were genuine rather than observational errors or misunderstood physics. The comparison also highlighted just how unusual the earlier objects had been. 4i Kepler's spectrum showed the expected mixture of water ice, carbon compounds, and rocky materials. Its outgassing followed predictable patterns based on solar heating. Its rotation was chaotic and irregular, exactly as you would expect from an object that had tumbled through space for millions of years. In every respect, it conformed to theoretical models of how interstellar debris should behave. This normalcy made the organized, controlled behavior of 3i Atlas appear even more artificial by comparison. The smooth acceleration profile, the precise timing, the clean electromagnetic emissions, all of these characteristics stood in stark contrast to the chaotic, random nature of truly natural objects like 4i Kepler. Meanwhile, deep space monitoring stations continued to track the electromagnetic signatures associated with the earlier anomalous visitors. The signals from 3I Atlas had long since faded beyond detection, but researchers had learned to look for similar patterns in the radio spectrum. What they found suggested that the electromagnetic trail phenomenon was not unique to that single object. Faint but structured emissions were detected along the projected paths of both Oumuamua and C2027L3, though these signals were much weaker and more intermittent than those associated with 3I Atlas. The pattern suggested that whatever process was generating these electromagnetic signatures varied in intensity between different objects, but the basic phenomenon appeared to be consistent across multiple interstellar visitors. Dr. James Morrison, who directed the Deep Space Network's contribution to these observations, noted in his classified reports that the signal characteristics bore disturbing similarities to the communication protocols used by deep space missions. The modulation patterns, frequency selection, and timing intervals all followed engineering principles that would be familiar to any spacecraft designer. Whether this represented convergent evolution of communication methods or something more direct was a question that kept him awake at night. The most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The James Webb Space Telescope, primarily designed for cosmological observations, was tasked with a brief infrared survey of the region where 3I Atlas had disappeared months earlier. The observation was largely symbolic, as no one expected to detect anything from an object that had faded beyond optical visibility and was now billions of kilometers away. But Webb's unprecedented sensitivity revealed something that changed everything. At the extreme limit of detectability, there was a faint infrared signature at the predicted coordinates. The signal was barely above background noise, but it was there, and it was moving at exactly the velocity that 3I Atlas should have had at that distance. The object, or something associated with it, was still emitting detectable radiation more than a year after its perihelion passage. This discovery sent shockwaves through the astronomical community. Natural objects don't continue emitting organized infrared radiation at such distances from the Sun. The energy source required to maintain detectable emissions across billions of kilometers of space exceeded anything that residual solar heating could provide. Either 3I Atlas contained some form of internal energy source, or it was actively generating radiation through processes that current physics couldn't explain. The Webb detection also revealed something else that made researchers profoundly uncomfortable. The infrared signature wasn't steady or random, as you would expect from thermal emissions. Instead, it showed a regular pulsing pattern with a period of approximately 11.3 hours. This matched almost exactly with the estimated rotation period of 3I Atlas that had been calculated during its initial observation phase. The implication was staggering. If the infrared pulses were synchronized with the object's rotation, it meant that whatever was generating the emissions was physically attached to or embedded within the object itself. This wasn't random radiation or scattered reflection from solar heating. This was organized activity that maintained coherence across vast distances and extended time periods. NASA's response to the Webb detection was swift and decisive. The finding was immediately classified, and access to the raw data was restricted to a small group of researchers with appropriate security clearances. Official statements described the observation as inconclusive instrumental noise and emphasized that no follow-up observations were planned. But within the closed circles of space science, everyone understood what the detection really meant. For the first time since its dramatic course change at perihelion, 3I Atlas had been directly observed exhibiting ongoing activity. The object wasn't just a passive chunk of rock and ice following a ballistic trajectory. It was an active system that continued to operate according to its own internal logic, emitting organized signals that could be detected across interstellar distances. The security implications of this discovery were immediately apparent to intelligence agencies that monitored space activities. If 3I Atlas was indeed an artificial object, its continued activity suggested that it was transmitting information, possibly reporting on its observations of the solar system to some distant recipient. The possibility that humanity had been surveyed and catalogued by an intelligence from another star system was no longer confined to theoretical speculation. But the most disturbing aspect of the Webb detection was what it implied about the other anomalous interstellar visitors. If 3I Atlas was still active more than a year after its departure, then Oumuamua might also have continued operating long after it had faded from human observation. The electromagnetic signatures detected along these objects' trajectories might represent ongoing communication networks that span the galaxy, with artificial objects regularly reporting their findings to some form of central intelligence. The implications extended far beyond astronomy into questions of planetary security and human survival. If the galaxy contained a network of artificial objects capable of surveying developing civilizations, then humanity's activities had likely been observed and recorded in detail. Every major technological advancement, every space launch, every military deployment might have been catalogued by intelligences whose capabilities and intentions remained completely unknown. This realization prompted quiet discussions between NASA, the Department of Defense, and several international space agencies about how to respond to the possibility of ongoing surveillance. The conversations were necessarily theoretical, as no one had any clear idea of how to communicate with or defend against technologies that could traverse interstellar distances and operate independently for years at a time. The Webb detection also raised questions about future interstellar visitors. If these objects were indeed part of some larger network or survey mission, then more would almost certainly arrive. The increasing detection rate suggested that the survey was intensifying, with more frequent visits and possibly more sophisticated observation platforms being deployed. This possibility led to the development of new protocols for handling future interstellar detections. Rather than the open, collaborative approach that had characterized earlier observations, future anomalous visitors would be subject to immediate security review. The decision about what information to release to the public would be made at the highest levels of government, with considerations that went far beyond scientific curiosity. As 2027 progressed, the astronomical community found itself operating under an unprecedented level of scrutiny and secrecy. The romantic notion of pure scientific discovery had been replaced by the harsh reality that some discoveries might have implications for national security and human survival. The universe had revealed itself to be far more complex and potentially dangerous than anyone had imagined when 3I Atlas first appeared as a faint dot of light in a survey telescope's field of view. The infrared emissions detected by Webb continued for several more months, before finally fading beyond the threshold of detection in late 2027. The final observations showed the same regular pulsing pattern, maintaining perfect synchronization with a calculated rotation period right up until the moment the signals disappeared. The clean termination was consistent with the controlled behavior that had characterized every aspect of 3I Atlas's activity throughout its passage through the solar system. But even as the signals faded, the questions they had raised continued to reverberate through every level of human society that was aware of their existence. The electromagnetic trail, the course correction, the ongoing infrared emissions, all of these phenomena pointed toward the same unsettling conclusion. Humanity was not alone in the galaxy, and the intelligences sharing our cosmic neighborhood possessed technologies that made our most advanced spacecraft look like primitive toys by comparison. The most profound realization was that this encounter might represent just the beginning of a much larger story. If 3I Atlas was indeed a survey probe, then its mission had been completed successfully. The data it had collected about human civilization, technological capabilities, and planetary resources had presumably been transmitted to its controllers. The question now was what would happen next, and whether humanity was prepared for whatever form of contact or consequence might follow from having been so thoroughly observed and catalogued by an intelligence from the stars. Stars. The discovery of organized activity from 3I Atlas, even after its disappearance, raised questions that extended far beyond astronomy. If this object was indeed maintaining some form of operational status across billions of kilometers, then the implications reached into every aspect of how humanity understood its place in the cosmos. The infrared emissions weren't just scientific anomalies anymore. They were potential evidence of a surveillance network that spanned interstellar distances. Intelligence analysts who had been quietly monitoring the situation began to piece together a disturbing timeline. The initial detection of 3I Atlas in July 2025 had occurred during a period of heightened space activity. Major powers were launching new military satellites, testing advanced propulsion systems, and conducting classified experiments in low Earth orbit. If the object had indeed been observing these activities, then its timing wasn't coincidental. It was strategic. The pattern became even more concerning when analysts compared the arrival windows of other anomalous interstellar visitors. Oumuamua had appeared in 2017, shortly after several nations had announced ambitious deep space exploration programs. The smaller object, C-2227L3, had been detected during a month when 3 different countries were testing new anti-missile defense systems. Each arrival seemed to coincide with moments of significant technological or military development on Earth. Dr. Catherine Walsh, a systems analyst who had been brought in to evaluate the security implications, noted in her classified assessment that the observation pattern was consistent with reconnaissance missions. The objects weren't arriving randomly. They were timing their visits to coincide with periods when human activities would provide maximum intelligence value. This suggested a level of planning and coordination that implied ongoing monitoring of Earth from afar. The possibility that human civilization had been under systematic surveillance for years, possibly decades, prompted a fundamental reassessment of space security protocols. If advanced intelligences were indeed cataloguing human capabilities, then every space launch, every satellite deployment, every test of new technology might have been recorded and analysed by entities whose intentions remained completely unknown. This realization led to the establishment of new oversight committees within NASA, the European Space Agency, and several national defense organizations. Their mandate was to develop response protocols for future interstellar encounters, but their real purpose was to prepare for the possibility that humanity might soon face contact with intelligences that had been studying us far longer than we had been studying them. The committees faced an almost impossible task. How do you prepare for contact with entities whose technological capabilities appear to exceed human understanding by orders of magnitude? The objects that had visited the solar system demonstrated mastery of interstellar travel, precision orbital mechanics, and electromagnetic technologies that human science was only beginning to comprehend. Any civilization capable of deploying such systems would presumably possess capabilities in other areas that were equally advanced. Military strategists found themselves confronting scenarios that had previously existed only in science fiction. If these visitors were indeed artificial constructs, then their creators possessed the ability to project power across interstellar distances. Traditional concepts of defense and deterrence became meaningless when dealing with intelligences that could deploy assets throughout the galaxy and maintain operational control across light years of space. The psychological implications were equally challenging. Humanity's entire conception of its place in the universe had been built around the assumption of cosmic isolation. The possibility that advanced civilizations had been observing and possibly evaluating human development forced a complete reconsideration of concepts like privacy, autonomy, and self-determination on a planetary scale. Religious leaders found themselves grappling with theological questions that had been purely theoretical until 3i Atlas changed course at perihelion. If intelligence existed beyond Earth, what did that mean for belief systems that placed humanity at the center of divine attention? The electromagnetic signals and controlled behaviors observed in these objects suggested the existence of minds that operated according to principles far removed from human experience or understanding. Educational institutions began quietly updating their curricula to address the possibility of non-terrestrial intelligence. Astronomy courses expanded to include discussions of technosignatures and artificial objects. Philosophy departments added seminars on the implications of contact with advanced civilizations. The changes were subtle, but they reflected a growing awareness that the universe revealed by 3i Atlas was fundamentally different from the one humanity had imagined. The scientific community itself underwent a profound transformation in the months following the Webb telescope detection. The collaborative open-source approach that had characterized astronomy for centuries gave way to a more cautious, security-conscious methodology. Research that might have implications for understanding advanced technologies became subject to classification reviews. International cooperation continued, but within frameworks that acknowledged the potential strategic significance of astronomical discoveries. This shift created tensions within the research community. Many scientists argued that the pursuit of knowledge should remain open and unrestricted, regardless of the implications of what might be discovered. Others countered that humanity's survival might depend on maintaining some level of operational security while learning to navigate a universe populated by intelligences of unknown intent. The debate intensified when preliminary analysis of the 3i Atlas electromagnetic signals revealed mathematical structures that appeared to encode information. The modulation patterns weren't random noise. They contained embedded sequences that followed logical progressions, suggesting that the signals might represent some form of data transmission or communication protocol. Dr. Eleanor Rodriguez, a mathematician specializing in information theory, was brought in to analyze these patterns. Her initial findings were both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The signal structures contained mathematical constants that were universal, such as prime number sequences and geometric ratios, but they were embedded within more complex frameworks that seemed to encode additional information. The implications were staggering. If 3i Atlas had indeed been transmitting encoded data during its passage through the solar system, then it had been actively communicating its observations to some distant recipient. The mathematical structures suggested that whoever was receiving these transmissions possessed sophisticated understanding of both mathematics and information, encoding principles. But the most disturbing aspect of Rodriguez's analysis was the possibility that the signals had been designed to be partially comprehensible to human observers. The embedded mathematical constants served as a kind of Rosetta Stone, providing reference points that could theoretically allow human analysts to begin deciphering the more complex information structures. This suggested that the intelligence behind 3i Atlas understood human mathematical capabilities well enough to design communications that operated at the threshold of human comprehension. The signals were complex enough to require significant analytical effort, but not so complex as to be completely incomprehensible. It was as if whoever had designed them wanted human scientists to eventually realize that structured information was being transmitted, without making the content immediately accessible. The possibility that humanity was being deliberately introduced to evidence of advanced intelligence through carefully calibrated revelations added a new dimension to the security concerns surrounding the 3i Atlas event. If these objects were indeed part of some form of contact protocol, then their activities might represent the opening phases of a much larger and more complex interaction. Intelligence agencies began developing models for how such a contact scenario might unfold. The pattern suggested a gradual escalation of evidence, beginning with anomalous but potentially natural phenomena, and progressing toward increasingly obvious demonstrations of technological capability. Each phase would allow human civilization time to adjust to new realities, while building toward eventual direct communication or contact. This model explained several aspects of the interstellar visitor phenomenon that had previously seemed puzzling. The long gap between Oumuamua and 3i Atlas could represent a deliberate pacing, designed to allow human science time to develop better observation capabilities. The increasing sophistication of the observed behaviors might reflect a planned progression toward more obvious displays of artificial intelligence. If this interpretation was correct, then the Webb telescope detection of ongoing infrared emissions from 3i Atlas represented a significant escalation in the contact protocol. For the first time, human observers had detected clear evidence of sustained artificial activity from an interstellar object. The signals were unambiguous enough that they could not be dismissed as natural phenomena, yet subtle enough that they remained within the realm of scientific rather than popular discourse. The timing of this revelation suggested that humanity was being gradually prepared for more dramatic developments. If the pattern continued, future interstellar visitors might exhibit even more obvious signs of artificial intelligence and technological capability. The progression might eventually lead to objects that actively attempted communication or demonstrated capabilities that could not possibly be explained by natural processes. This possibility prompted urgent discussions about how humanity should respond if and when such contact occurred. The traditional scientific approach of open publication and collaborative analysis might not be appropriate for encounters with intelligences whose capabilities and intentions remained unknown. National security considerations might require more restrictive handling of information that could have strategic implications. At the same time, the global nature of astronomical observation made complete secrecy impossible. Professional and amateur astronomers around the world were monitoring the skies with increasingly sophisticated equipment. Any future interstellar visitor would likely be detected by multiple independent observers, making coordinated information control extremely difficult. The solution that emerged was a compromise that reflected the unprecedented nature of the situation. A new international framework was established for handling anomalous astronomical discoveries with potential security implications. The framework provided for rapid information sharing among allied nations while maintaining the ability to restrict public disclosure until the implications of discoveries could be properly assessed. This framework was tested almost immediately when the next confirmed interstellar visitor was detected in late 2027. Object 5I Newton appeared unremarkable at first, following a standard hyperbolic trajectory that suggested natural origin. But as it approached perihelion, monitoring stations detected the now familiar pattern of precisely timed electromagnetic emissions. The signals from 5I Newton were stronger and more complex than those observed from previous visitors. They contained clear mathematical structures and appeared to include embedded references to fundamental physical constants. Most significantly, the transmission patterns showed variations that seemed to correlate with the object's position relative to Earth, suggesting that the signals were being deliberately directed toward human observers. The detection of apparently intentional communication from an interstellar object marked a watershed moment in human history. For the first time, there was unambiguous evidence that non-terrestrial intelligence was attempting to establish some form of contact with Earth. The implications extended far beyond science into questions of diplomacy, security, and the fundamental future of human civilization. But even as this momentous realization sank in, the object that had started it all continued its silent journey through the outer reaches of the solar system. 3I Atlas had completed its mission, whatever that mission had been, and was now heading toward the interstellar void from which it had emerged. The infrared emissions that had provided the final proof of its artificial nature had faded beyond detection, leaving behind only the memory of those regular pulses that had synchronized so perfectly with its rotation. The course change that had first alerted humanity to 3I Atlas's unusual nature had accomplished far more than a simple trajectory adjustment. It had opened human eyes to the reality that the galaxy was populated by intelligences whose capabilities exceeded current human understanding. The 90 minutes of acceleration at perihelion had marked the beginning of a new era in human history, one in which the species would have to learn to navigate a cosmos filled with minds that had been watching from the darkness between the stars. As 3I Atlas disappeared into the vast emptiness beyond Neptune's orbit, it carried with it detailed observations of a young civilization taking its first tentative steps toward understanding its place in a universe far more complex and populated than it had ever imagined. The data it had collected during its passage through the solar system would presumably find its way to intelligences that had been monitoring human development for far longer than anyone wanted to contemplate. But perhaps most significantly, 3I Atlas had left behind a changed humanity. The species that had first detected it as a faint point of light moving against the background stars was not the same species that now watched it fade into interstellar darkness. The knowledge that intelligence existed beyond Earth, that humanity was part of a larger community of minds scattered across the galaxy, had fundamentally altered human consciousness in ways that would reverberate through every aspect of civilization for generations to come. The electromagnetic trail had gone silent, the infrared emissions had faded beyond detection, and the object itself had become indistinguishable from the cosmic background. But the questions 3I Atlas had raised about humanity's place in the universe continued to echo through observatories and research centres around the world. The universe had revealed itself to be stranger, more purposeful, and more densely populated than anyone had dared to imagine. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, other objects were undoubtedly making their own silent approaches toward the solar system, carrying their own mysteries and their own implications for the future of human civilization. The trajectory data that emerged in the following months painted a picture that challenged every assumption about how objects behave in the depths of space. Multiple tracking stations had confirmed that 3I Atlas was no longer following the path that orbital mechanics demanded. The deviation wasn't subtle anymore, it was measurable, consistent, and growing larger with each passing week. Dr. Michael Chen at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory had been running trajectory updates using the most sophisticated models available to human science. What he found kept him awake at night, staring at equations that refused to balance according to the laws that governed everything else in the known universe. The object's position was deviating from the predicted path by thousands of kilometers, a discrepancy that grew larger every time new data came in. This wasn't the gradual drift you might expect from residual outgassing effects or subtle gravitational perturbations from distant planets. This was systematic deviation that followed a clean mathematical curve, as if something was actively steering the object along a predetermined route. The precision was so exact that Chen's colleagues began referring to it as navigation rather than drift. The implications were staggering. If 3i Atlas was indeed under some form of guidance, then it possessed the ability to make course corrections across billions of kilometers of empty space. This suggested an internal power source, a guidance system, and most unsettling of all, a destination. The object wasn't wandering aimlessly through the void. It was travelling towards something specific. Independent confirmation came from the European Space Agency's tracking stations, which had been monitoring the object's radio emissions since the initial electromagnetic detections. The signals weren't random bursts of interference anymore. They had evolved into structured patterns that showed clear evidence of information encoding. Dr. Sarah Martinez, who led the signal analysis team, described the transmissions as resembling a data stream more than natural radio noise. The most disturbing aspect of these communications was their apparent targeting. The signal strength and directional characteristics suggested that the transmissions were being beamed toward a specific region of space, roughly in the direction of the constellation Lyra. This wasn't random broadcasting. Something was sending detailed information about its passage through the solar system to receivers located approximately 40 light-years from Earth. The possibility that humanity had been surveyed and catalogued by an intelligence capable of interstellar communication forced a fundamental reassessment of Earth's position in the cosmic hierarchy. Every major technological development, every space mission, every military capability had potentially been observed and recorded by minds that operated on scales and timelines completely beyond human experience. Military analysts who had been brought into the growing circle of those aware of 3i Atlas's true nature began developing scenarios for what might happen next. If the object had indeed completed a reconnaissance mission, then its controllers now possessed detailed intelligence about human capabilities and vulnerabilities. The question was what they intended to do with that information. The traditional frameworks for thinking about national security became meaningless when dealing with intelligences that could deploy assets across interstellar distances. Conventional concepts of borders, sovereignty, and defense had no relevance to entities that could observe Earth from the darkness between stars and communicate across dozens of light-years of space. Dr. James Morrison, who directed the Deep Space Network's contribution to the ongoing monitoring effort, noted that the communication patterns followed engineering principles that would be familiar to any spacecraft designer. The frequency selection, modulation techniques, and transmission timing all reflected optimization strategies that human engineers used when designing interplanetary communication systems. This technical sophistication suggested that whoever was controlling 3i Atlas possessed understanding of electromagnetic physics that paralleled or exceeded human knowledge. But the truly unsettling implication was that this understanding had been applied to create systems that could operate autonomously across the vast distances and timescales of interstellar space. As the months passed, the radio transmissions from 3i Atlas began to evolve in ways that suggested increasing distance from the solar system. The signal strength decreased according to the inverse square law, but the modulation patterns became more complex, as if the object was uploading increasingly detailed information as it moved beyond the range of potential interference from solar radiation. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, whose mathematical analysis had revealed the information structures embedded in the earlier signals, found that the evolving transmissions contained progressively more sophisticated encoding schemes. It was as if the object was transitioning from basic status reports to comprehensive data dumps as it reached safer communication distances from the Sun. The content of these transmissions remained largely incomprehensible, but the mathematical frameworks were becoming clearer. Rodriguez identified sequences that appeared to encode stellar positions, physical constants, and what might have been technological specifications. The data stream resembled the kind of comprehensive survey report that human scientists might compile after studying an alien world. This realization prompted urgent discussions about the possibility that other star systems had been similarly surveyed. If 3i Atlas represented one element of a larger reconnaissance network, then intelligences somewhere in the galaxy might possess detailed catalogues of hundreds or thousands of stellar systems and their associated planets. The implications extended beyond simple surveillance into questions about the intentions behind such comprehensive intelligence gathering. Civilizations that invested in systematic surveys of other worlds were presumably planning to act on that information in some way. Whether those actions would be beneficial, neutral, or hostile to existing life remained completely unknown. Meanwhile, the continuing course corrections executed by 3i Atlas demonstrated a level of autonomous decision-making that challenged human understanding of artificial intelligence. The object was making navigation choices based on real-time analysis of its environment, adjusting its trajectory to optimize for unknown objectives while maintaining communication with distant controllers. The precision of these maneuvers suggested computational capabilities that exceeded anything in human technology. The object was simultaneously processing navigational data, maintaining communication protocols, and executing complex orbital mechanics calculations while operating completely independently, billions of kilometers from any support infrastructure. Dr. Lisa Park, a specialist in autonomous systems who had been consulting on the 3i Atlas analysis, noted that the observed behaviors indicated artificial intelligence operating at levels that human computer science was only beginning to theorize about. The object was demonstrating machine consciousness that could adapt, learn, and make strategic decisions across timescales measured in months and years. This capability raised profound questions about the nature of intelligence itself. If artificial minds could be created that operated independently across interstellar distances, then the galaxy might contain vast networks of interconnected machine intelligences sharing information and coordinating activities on scales that biological minds could barely comprehend. The possibility that humanity had encountered the edge of such a network explained several aspects of the 3i Atlas event that had previously seemed puzzling. The object's comprehensive survey activities, its sophisticated communication protocols, and its apparent coordination with other anomalous interstellar visitors all made sense within the framework of a larger intelligence-gathering operation. Intelligence agencies that had been monitoring the situation began to develop models for how such a network might operate. The scenario they constructed involved autonomous survey probes dispatched to star systems of interest, comprehensive data collection over extended observation periods, and detailed reporting back to central processing nodes that could be located anywhere in the galaxy. Within this framework, objects like 3i Atlas and Oumuamua represented reconnaissance elements of a civilization or collective intelligence that had achieved mastery over interstellar distances. The increasing frequency of interstellar visitor detections might indicate an intensification of survey activities, possibly in preparation for more direct forms of contact or intervention. The technical capabilities demonstrated by 3i Atlas suggested that any civilization capable of deploying such systems would possess technologies in other areas that were equally advanced. Propulsion systems that could accelerate objects to significant fractions of light speed, communication networks that spanned dozens of light years, and artificial intelligence systems that could operate independently for decades or centuries. Such capabilities implied a level of technological development that exceeded human understanding by orders of magnitude. Any direct encounter with the intelligences behind these systems would involve contact with minds that operated according to principles and priorities that might be completely incomprehensible to biological intelligence. The psychological implications of this realization began to affect the researchers who had been following the 3i Atlas story since its beginning. The comfortable assumption that humanity represented the pinnacle of intelligence in the local galactic region had been shattered by evidence of minds that could think and plan across interstellar scales. Dr. Catherine Walsh, who had been analyzing the security implications of the ongoing surveillance, noted in her reports that human civilization was effectively operating under observation by intelligences whose capabilities and intentions remained completely unknown. Every aspect of human development was potentially being monitored, analyzed, and catalogued by entities that could act on that information in ways that human strategic planning could not anticipate. This situation created a fundamental asymmetry of information that placed humanity at a severe disadvantage. While human scientists struggled to understand the basic nature of objects like 3i Atlas, the intelligences controlling these systems presumably possessed detailed knowledge about human technology, social structures, military capabilities, and strategic vulnerabilities. The radio transmissions from 3i Atlas continued throughout 2028, gradually weakening as the object moved beyond the range of Earth-based receivers. The final signals detected by the Deep Space Network showed the same structured encoding patterns that had characterized the entire communication sequence, suggesting that the object maintained full operational capability even at extreme distances from the solar system. The last confirmed transmission was received in January 2029, nearly 4 years after the object's initial detection. The signal was faint but unmistakably artificial, containing mathematical structures that had become familiar to the teams monitoring the communication stream. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the transmission ceased entirely. The silence that followed was somehow more unsettling than the signals had been. For years, researchers had grown accustomed to the steady stream of data, indicating that 3I Atlas remained active and communicating. The sudden termination suggested that the object had either moved beyond communication range, completed its mission, or encountered some form of interference that had disrupted its operations. Analysis of the final transmission revealed mathematical structures that appeared to encode summary information, as if the object was providing a comprehensive conclusion to its extended surveillance mission. Dr. Rodriguez identified sequences that seemed to correlate with major events in human technological development, suggesting that the object had been maintaining detailed records of human progress throughout its passage through the solar system. The possibility that this final transmission contained a complete intelligence assessment of human civilization was both fascinating and terrifying. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, minds of unknown capability and intent now possessed detailed knowledge about humanity's strengths, weaknesses, and potential for future development. But perhaps the most significant aspect of 3I Atlas's departure was what it revealed about the changing nature of the universe itself. The electromagnetic silence that followed the final transmission wasn't empty. It was pregnant with possibility, suggesting that other objects, other missions, other forms of contact might already be approaching through the cosmic dark. The detection systems that had been developed to monitor 3I Atlas remained active, scanning the edges of the solar system for signs of new visitors. The knowledge that intelligence existed beyond Earth, that humanity was part of a larger community of minds scattered across the galaxy, had fundamentally altered how human scientists approached the task of studying the cosmos. Every new detection was now evaluated not just for scientific interest, but for evidence of artificial origin or controlled behavior. The universe revealed by 3I Atlas was one populated by active intelligences pursuing agendas that intersected with human development in ways that remained largely mysterious but increasingly consequential. As 2029 progressed, the full implications of humanity's encounter with 3I Atlas continued to reverberate through every level of society that was aware of the true nature of the event. The object had accomplished far more than a simple trajectory change during its 90-minute acceleration at perihelion. It had opened human eyes to a cosmos filled with minds that operated on scales and timelines that dwarfed human experience and understanding. The course change that had first alerted astronomers to the object's unusual nature now seemed like the least significant aspect of its mission. The real revelation was the existence of intelligence networks that spanned interstellar distances, maintained surveillance over developing civilizations, and possessed capabilities that made human technology appear primitive by comparison. But most importantly, 3I Atlas had demonstrated that contact between intelligences separated by interstellar distances was not only possible, but was actively occurring. The universe was not the empty, silent void that human science had imagined. It was a dynamic environment populated by minds that communicated across the darkness, shared information on galactic scales, and pursued objectives that remained tantalizingly beyond human comprehension. The electromagnetic trail had gone silent. The course corrections had ended, and the object itself had disappeared beyond the reach of human observation. But the knowledge it had brought remained, fundamentally altering humanity's understanding of its place in a cosmos that was far stranger, more populous, and more purposeful than anyone had dared to imagine. Somewhere in the interstellar void, 3I Atlas continued its journey toward unknown destinations, carrying with it detailed observations of a young civilization that had just begun to grasp the true complexity of the universe it inhabited. The data it had collected would presumably contribute to intelligence databases that spanned the galaxy, adding humanity to catalogues of worlds and species that had been compiled by minds that thought in terms of geological ages and interstellar distances. and in the darkness between stars, other objects were undoubtedly making their own silent approaches toward the solar system, carrying their own sophisticated sensor packages and their own missions of observation and analysis. The age of cosmic isolation had ended with 3I Atlas's course change at perihelion, replaced by an era in which humanity would have to learn to navigate a universe populated by intelligences whose capabilities and intentions remained largely beyond human understanding. The 90 minutes of acceleration that had first revealed 3I Atlas's artificial nature had marked the beginning of humanity's education about the true nature of the galactic community it was about to join. Whether that education would continue through gradual revelation or more dramatic forms of contact remained to be seen. But the process had clearly begun with an object that had demonstrated the universe's capacity for intelligence, purpose, and communication across the vast distances that separate the stars. The revelation that 3I Atlas possessed active communication capabilities fundamentally altered how humanity approached the monitoring of interstellar space. The structured radio transmissions and coordinated course corrections had demonstrated that these objects weren't passive chunks of rock and ice drifting between stars. They were sophisticated systems capable of independent operation, real-time decision-making, and long-range communication with entities whose locations and intentions remained completely unknown. Dr. Sarah Chen, who had been leading the electromagnetic analysis team at the Deep Space Network, made a discovery in early 2029 that sent shockwaves through the classified research community. While reviewing archived data from the period immediately following 3I Atlas's perihelion passage, she found evidence of what appeared to be coordinated communication between multiple sources in the outer solar system. The signals weren't coming from 3I Atlas alone. Faint but structured emissions had been detected from regions where no known objects should exist, suggesting the presence of additional artificial systems that had somehow evaded detection by conventional observation methods. These phantom signals followed the same mathematical encoding patterns that had characterized 3I Atlas's transmissions, indicating they were part of the same communication network. The implications were staggering. If multiple artificial objects were operating within the solar system simultaneously, then humanity had been under far more comprehensive surveillance than anyone had realized. The single dramatic course change at perihelion might have been just the most visible aspect of a much larger intelligence-gathering operation that had been proceeding quietly for months, or possibly years. Intelligence analysts who reviewed Chen's findings concluded that the solar system had likely been infiltrated by an entire network of reconnaissance assets, most of which had remained undetected throughout their missions. The technology required to accomplish such comprehensive stealth surveillance exceeded human capabilities by orders of magnitude, suggesting contact with civilizations that had achieved mastery over interstellar operations. The discovery prompted an urgent review of all astronomical data collected over the previous decade. Teams of analysts began searching through archived observations from major telescopes and survey programs, looking for subtle anomalies that might indicate the presence of artificial objects that had been misidentified as natural phenomena. What they found was deeply disturbing. Scattered throughout the astronomical records were dozens of minor discrepancies and unexplained observations that, when viewed in the context of the 3I Atlas revelations, suggested a pattern of systematic surveillance stretching back years. Objects that had been catalogued as distant asteroids showed subtle signs of controlled motion. Survey data contained radio emissions that followed structured patterns rather than random noise. Photometric measurements revealed brightness variations that suggested artificial rather than natural rotation periods. Dr. Michael Torres, who led the comprehensive data review, estimated that at least 12 separate artificial objects had operated within the solar system over the previous 5 years, most remaining completely undetected until the enhanced analysis protocols developed in response to 3I Atlas were applied retroactively to older observations. The revelation that humanity had been under continuous surveillance by multiple advanced systems created a crisis within the intelligence community. Traditional concepts of security and defense became meaningless when dealing with technologies that could operate undetected within Earth's own solar system for extended periods. The implication suggested that every aspect of human technological development had been observed, recorded, and presumably transmitted to intelligences whose locations and capabilities remained unknown. Meanwhile, the Vera Rubin Observatory continued to detect new interstellar visitors at an accelerating pace. By mid-2029, the detection rate had increased to nearly one confirmed interstellar object per month, a dramatic escalation from the historical average of perhaps one per decade. Each new detection was subjected to the comprehensive monitoring protocols developed in response to 3i Atlas, revealing an unsettling pattern of controlled behaviors and artificial characteristics. Object 6i Prometheus, detected in March 2029, exhibited the now familiar pattern of precise course corrections timed to coincide with optimal orbital mechanics. Its trajectory brought it close to several planets during its passage through the inner solar system, providing ideal observation angles for detailed surveillance of human space activities. The object's communication emissions were stronger and more complex than any previously detected, suggesting technological advancement or different mission parameters. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. These weren't random interstellar debris following chaotic trajectories through the galaxy. They were coordinated missions executed by artificial systems that possessed sophisticated navigation, communication, and surveillance capabilities. The frequency of visits suggested an intensification of intelligence-gathering activities, possibly in preparation for more direct forms of contact or intervention. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, whose mathematical analysis had revealed the information structures in the original 3i Atlas signals, made another breakthrough when she applied advanced decryption algorithms to the accumulated transmission data from multiple objects. The results provided the first glimpse into the actual content being communicated between these surveillance systems and their distant controllers. The decoded information contained detailed technical specifications for human spacecraft, comprehensive analyses of Earth's atmospheric composition, and what appeared to be strategic assessments of human military capabilities. Most disturbing were data structures that seemed to catalogue individual human installations, including space launch facilities, deep space communication arrays, and classified military sites. The level of detail in these intelligence reports exceeded what human reconnaissance satellites could achieve when observing foreign nations on Earth. The artificial systems had been conducting comprehensive technical intelligence, gathering operations that provided their controllers with intimate knowledge of human capabilities, vulnerabilities, and strategic assets. The psychological impact of these revelations on the research teams was profound. Dr. Walsh noted in her classified reports that the researchers were experiencing what she termed surveillance shock, the disorienting realization that their every professional activity had been observed and analyzed by intelligences whose motivations and intentions remained completely opaque. The situation created a fundamental asymmetry that placed humanity at an extreme disadvantage. While human scientists struggled to understand the basic operational principles of these surveillance systems, the intelligences controlling them possessed comprehensive knowledge about human technology, social structures, and strategic capabilities. Any future interaction would occur on terms largely dictated by entities that had been studying humanity far longer than humanity had been aware of their existence. This asymmetry prompted discussions within the highest levels of government about how to respond to the reality of ongoing surveillance. Traditional diplomatic protocols had no relevance to entities that could monitor human activities from interstellar distances. Military responses seemed futile against technologies that could traverse the galaxy and operate undetected within Earth's own solar system. The solution that emerged was a comprehensive reassessment of human space activities designed to minimize the intelligence value of ongoing surveillance. Classified projects were moved to more secure facilities, communication protocols were enhanced to resist interception, and space missions were redesigned to limit the exposure of sensitive technologies to external observation. But the fundamental reality remained unchanged. Humanity was operating under the observation of intelligences whose capabilities exceeded human technology by orders of magnitude. Every major technological advancement, every space mission, every strategic decision was potentially being monitored, analyzed, and reported to entities whose intentions regarding human civilization remained completely unknown. The continuing detections of new interstellar visitors throughout 2029 suggested that this surveillance was not diminishing but intensifying. Each new object brought more sophisticated observation equipment and more advanced communication systems. The progression implied that whoever was conducting these reconnaissance missions was preparing for something that required increasingly detailed intelligence about human capabilities and activities. Dr. James Morrison, who had been coordinating the Deep Space Network's monitoring of these objects, noted that the communication patterns were evolving in ways that suggested preparation for more direct forms of interaction. The mathematical structures embedded in the transmissions were becoming more accessible to human analysis, as if the controlling intelligences wanted their presence to be gradually recognized and understood. This possibility raised questions about the ultimate objectives behind the surveillance operations. If the goal was simply intelligence gathering, there would be no reason to make the communications partially comprehensible to human observers. The fact that the signals contained elements designed to be eventually decoded suggested that contact, rather than mere observation, might be the ultimate objective. The implications of potential contact with intelligences that possessed comprehensive knowledge about human civilization, while remaining largely unknown to humanity, created unprecedented challenges for diplomatic and strategic planning. Any communication would occur between parties with vastly asymmetric information, technological capabilities, and strategic positions. As 2029 drew to a close, the full scope of humanity's encounter with advanced interstellar intelligence was beginning to come into focus. What had begun with a single object-changing course at perihelion had revealed a comprehensive surveillance network that spanned the solar system and communicated across interstellar distances. The universe that humanity thought it inhabited, one characterized by cosmic isolation and gradual technological development, had been replaced by a reality in which advanced intelligences monitored developing civilizations and pursued objectives that remained largely beyond human comprehension. The electromagnetic signals that had first revealed 3I Atlas's artificial nature continued to be detected from new visitors, each transmission adding to databases that presumably contained detailed assessments of human technological and strategic capabilities. The course corrections that had initially seemed like isolated anomalies were now understood to be routine navigation adjustments executed by artificial systems operating according to mission parameters developed by intelligences of unknown origin and intent. But perhaps most significantly, the pattern of increasing detection frequency and technological sophistication suggested that the surveillance phase of whatever larger agenda was being pursued was approaching completion. The comprehensive intelligence gathering that had been conducted over multiple years was presumably being compiled into strategic assessments that would inform decisions about how to proceed with more direct forms of contact or intervention. The 90 minutes of acceleration that had first alerted humanity to 3I Atlas's unusual nature had marked the beginning of a new chapter in human history, one in which the species would have to navigate a universe populated by intelligences whose capabilities and intentions remained largely mysterious but increasingly consequential. The revelation that these intelligences had been studying humanity far longer than humanity had been aware of their existence had fundamentally altered the strategic calculus for human civilization's future development. As new interstellar visitors continued to arrive with increasing frequency, each bringing more advanced observation systems and more sophisticated communication capabilities, humanity found itself preparing for encounters that would occur on terms largely dictated by entities that possessed comprehensive knowledge about human civilization while remaining largely enigmatic to human understanding. The trajectory change that had first revealed 3I Atlas's artificial nature had accomplished something far more significant than a simple course correction. It had opened human eyes to a cosmos populated by active intelligences that maintained surveillance networks spanning multiple star systems and pursued objectives that operated on timescales and spatial scales that dwarfed human experience and comprehension. The data streams that had revealed the true nature of these surveillance operations continued to flow from new arrivals, each transmission adding to the accumulating evidence that humanity was part of a larger galactic community, whose activities and intentions remained largely beyond current human understanding. The silence of deep space had been replaced by the quiet hum of interstellar communication networks that connected intelligences across the darkness between stars. And somewhere in that network, the observations collected by 3I Atlas and its companion systems were being analysed and integrated into strategic assessments that would presumably inform decisions about how to proceed with the next phase of whatever larger agenda was being pursued. The course change at perihelion had been just the beginning of a story whose ultimate implications for human civilization remained to be determined by minds that thought in terms of geological ages and galactic distances. The electromagnetic surveillance network that had been operating throughout the solar system for years began to reveal its true scope as 2030 approached. What researchers initially thought was a single anomalous visitor had evolved into recognition of a comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation spanning multiple star systems. The artificial objects weren't operating independently. They were nodes in a communication network that stretched across dozens of light years, coordinating their activities and sharing data in real time despite the vast distances involved. Dr. Patricia Kim at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory made a discovery that changed everything when she detected synchronized transmission patterns between objects separated by billions of kilometers. The signals weren't just random communications. They were coordinated data exchanges that suggested a level of network architecture that human technology was only beginning to theorize about. These systems were maintaining constant communication links across interstellar distances, sharing observations and coordinating activities with precision that exceeded human understanding. The mathematical analysis of these network communications revealed something that made intelligence analysts deeply uncomfortable. The data flows weren't chaotic or random as you might expect from natural phenomena. They followed structured protocols that resembled the communication architectures used by advanced computer networks, complete with error correction, data compression, and routing algorithms that optimized information flow across vast distances. What made this revelation particularly unsettling was the implication that these artificial systems possessed computational capabilities that operated on scales completely beyond human experience. They were processing and analyzing data from multiple sources simultaneously, making strategic decisions based on information gathered across the entire solar system, and coordinating their activities according to mission parameters that spanned years or possibly decades. The network architecture suggested that each individual object like 3i Atlas was just one component in a much larger system, designed to conduct comprehensive surveillance of developing civilizations. The scope of this operation implied planning and resource allocation on scales that indicated civilizations with capabilities that dwarfed human technological achievement by orders of magnitude. Intelligence agencies that had been monitoring the situation began to develop models for how such a network might operate on galactic scales. The scenario they constructed involved thousands or possibly tens of thousands of artificial systems distributed throughout the galaxy, each conducting detailed surveillance of star systems that contained potentially interesting planetary environments. Within this framework, the solar system represented just one target among many in a comprehensive survey program that had been operating for timescales that might be measured in centuries or millennia. The increasing frequency of detections wasn't necessarily an escalation of surveillance activity. It might simply reflect the natural conclusion of a long-term observation program that was entering its final data collection phase. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, who had been analyzing the communication protocols, made another disturbing discovery when he applied advanced signal processing techniques to the accumulated transmission data. The network wasn't just collecting information about human technological capabilities, it was also monitoring natural phenomena throughout the solar system, with a level of detail that suggested scientific interests that went far beyond simple reconnaissance. The artificial systems were conducting comprehensive studies of solar activity, planetary atmospheres, magnetic field interactions, and gravitational dynamics. They were gathering data about the fundamental physical processes that governed the solar system's operation, information that would be valuable for understanding how similar systems might behave elsewhere in the galaxy. This scientific focus suggested that the intelligence behind these surveillance operations possessed curiosity and research interests that paralleled human scientific endeavors, but operated on scales and timelines that made human research efforts seem primitive by comparison. They were conducting galaxy-wide surveys that provided comprehensive understanding of how stellar systems evolved and how life might develop within them. The possibility that humanity was being studied not just as a potential threat or opportunity, but as a scientific specimen in a vast research program, created new psychological challenges for those aware of the surveillance operations. The comfortable assumption that human civilization was the center of cosmic attention was replaced by the reality that Earth might be just one entry in vast databases that catalogued thousands of worlds and species throughout the galaxy. Meanwhile, the continuing detections of new interstellar visitors revealed that the surveillance network was becoming more sophisticated and more obvious in its artificial characteristics. Object 7I Darwin, detected in June 2030, didn't even attempt to maintain the pretense of natural behaviour. Its trajectory included multiple course corrections, its communications were broadcast on frequencies specifically chosen to be detectable by human radio telescopes, and its approach path brought it within observational range of every major human space installation. The obviousness of 7I Darwin's artificial nature suggested that the controlling intelligences had decided to abandon stealth in favour of gradual revelation. The object was clearly designed to be recognised as artificial by human observers, marking a significant shift in the apparent contact protocol that had been unfolding over the previous years. This transition from covert surveillance to obvious artificial behaviour created intense debates within the intelligence community about how to respond. The gradual revelation suggested that contact might be imminent, but the form that contact might take remained completely unknown. The technological superiority demonstrated by these systems meant that any interaction would occur entirely on terms dictated by the visiting intelligences. Dr. Sarah Martinez, who had been coordinating the international response to these developments, noted that humanity was facing a situation without precedent in recorded history. Contact with advanced extraterrestrial intelligence had been theoretical until the course change of 3I Atlas revealed that such intelligence was not only real, but had been actively studying human civilization for years. The communication patterns detected from 7I Darwin contained mathematical structures that were clearly designed to be comprehensible to human mathematicians. The signals included references to fundamental physical constants, geometric relationships, and even what appeared to be technological specifications that might represent attempts at information exchange rather than simple data collection. The possibility that these transmissions represented the opening phases of actual communication rather than mere surveillance created both excitement and apprehension within the research community. Humanity had spent decades developing protocols for potential contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, but none of those protocols had anticipated contact with entities that possessed comprehensive knowledge about human civilization, gained through years of covert observation. The asymmetric nature of the situation meant that any communication would begin with the visiting intelligences holding enormous advantages in terms of information, technological capability, and strategic position. They understood human languages, technological capabilities, and social structures, while humanity remained largely ignorant about their origins, motivations, and intentions. Intelligence analysts developed several scenarios for how first contact might proceed under these circumstances. The most optimistic involved gradual communication exchange leading to beneficial technological and scientific cooperation. The most pessimistic involved demands or ultimatums backed by technological capabilities that humanity could not match or resist. But perhaps the most likely scenario involved something between these extremes. Contact that proceeded according to agendas and priorities that remained largely incomprehensible to human understanding. The intelligences behind these surveillance operations clearly possessed goals and motivations that operated on timescales and spatial scales that dwarfed human experience. The continuing evolution of the communication signals throughout 2030 suggested that the transition from surveillance to contact was proceeding according to carefully planned protocols. Each new interstellar visitor brought more sophisticated communication equipment and more obvious attempts at information exchange with human observers. Object 8I Tesla, detected in September 2030, transmitted signals that contained what appeared to be technological blueprints encoded in mathematical formats that human engineers could potentially decipher. The transmissions weren't random data streams anymore. They were structured information packages that seemed designed to gradually introduce human scientists to technologies and concepts that operated beyond current human understanding. The implications of receiving advanced technological information from entities whose motivations remained unknown created significant security concerns. Intelligence agencies worried that the transmitted technologies might contain hidden capabilities or dependencies that could compromise human autonomy or security if implemented without complete understanding. At the same time, the potential benefits of accessing technologies developed by civilizations that had achieved mastery over interstellar distances were too significant to ignore. The propulsion systems, communication networks, and computational capabilities demonstrated by these surveillance systems could revolutionize human technological development if they could be safely understood and implemented. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who led the team analysing the technological transmissions, noted that the information being provided seemed carefully calibrated to human comprehension levels. The concepts were advanced enough to represent significant technological progress, but not so advanced as to be completely incomprehensible to human scientists and engineers. This calibration suggested that the transmitting intelligences possessed detailed understanding of human technological capabilities and were deliberately providing information that operated at the threshold of human comprehension. The technology transfers weren't random gifts. They were carefully planned educational programs designed to gradually expand human understanding of advanced scientific principles. The possibility that humanity was being deliberately educated by advanced intelligences raised profound questions about the ultimate objectives behind these interventions. If the goal was simply resource extraction or territorial expansion, there would be no reason to enhance human technological capabilities. The educational component suggested motivations that might be more complex and potentially more benevolent than simple conquest or exploitation. However, intelligence analysts remained cautious about assuming benevolent intentions. Advanced civilizations might have reasons for enhancing human technological development that served their own strategic objectives rather than human interests. The educational programs might be designed to prepare humanity for roles or responsibilities within larger galactic systems that operated according to priorities and values that remained unknown to human understanding. As 2030 drew to a close, the trajectory that had begun with 3i Atlas's course, change at perihelion had evolved into comprehensive contact between human civilization and intelligences that possessed capabilities extending across interstellar distances. The electromagnetic signals that had first revealed artificial characteristics in interstellar visitors had become structured communication channels that were gradually introducing humanity to technologies and concepts that operated far beyond current human understanding. The surveillance network that had been monitoring human development for years was transitioning into active communication and technology transfer programs that suggested preparation for more direct forms of interaction. The universe revealed by these developments was populated by active intelligences that maintained communication networks spanning multiple star systems and pursued objectives that operated on timescales and spatial scales that dwarfed human experience. The 90 minutes of acceleration that had first alerted humanity to 3i Atlas's unusual nature had marked the beginning of a transformation that was reshaping human understanding of cosmic reality. The revelation that advanced intelligences had been studying human civilization while remaining largely hidden had given way to recognition that these same intelligences were now actively engaging with humanity according to agendas and priorities that remained largely mysterious but increasingly consequential. The course change that had seemed like an isolated anomaly was now understood to be the opening movement in a carefully orchestrated contact protocol that was gradually revealing the existence of galactic civilizations whose capabilities and intentions would determine the future trajectory of human development. The electromagnetic silence of deep space had been replaced by active communication networks that connected intelligences across the darkness between stars, and humanity was beginning to receive its first invitations to participate in conversations that spanned the galaxy. The data streams flowing from these communication networks continued to expand human understanding of technologies and scientific principles that had been developed by civilizations with access to resources and timescales that exceeded human imagination. Each transmission brought new concepts and capabilities that pushed the boundaries of human knowledge while raising questions about the ultimate purposes behind these educational programs. As new interstellar visitors continued to arrive with increasing frequency and sophistication, humanity found itself at the threshold of a transformation that would fundamentally alter the species' relationship with the cosmos. The trajectory change that had first revealed 3i Atlas's artificial nature had opened doorways to realities that extended far beyond the solar system, connecting human civilization to galactic communities whose activities and intentions were reshaping the fundamental context within which human development would proceed. The signals that continued to flow from the expanding network of artificial systems operating throughout the solar system carried information and technologies that represented just the beginning of humanity's education about the true nature of the universe it inhabited. The course correction executed by 3i Atlas during those crucial 90 minutes at perihelion had accomplished something far more significant than a simple trajectory adjustment. It had initiated humanity's transition from cosmic isolation to active participation in communication networks that spanned the galaxy and connected intelligences whose capabilities and objectives operated on scales that challenged human understanding, but offered possibilities that extended far beyond current human imagination. By early 2031, the transformation initiated by 3i Atlas had reached a critical threshold. The artificial systems that had once operated in shadows were now broadcasting their presence with unmistakable clarity. Every major observatory on Earth was tracking multiple interstellar visitors simultaneously, each displaying characteristics that left no doubt about their engineered origins. The Atacama Large Millimeter Array detected Object 9I Kepler in February, and this time there was no pretense of natural behavior. The object decelerated as it entered the solar system, executed a perfect orbital, insertion around Jupiter, and began transmitting structured data on frequencies specifically allocated for deep space communication by human space agencies. It wasn't hiding anymore, it was announcing itself. Dr. Maria Santos at the European Southern Observatory watched the real-time data stream with a mixture of fascination and unease. The signals weren't just mathematical progressions or encoded information packets anymore. They contained what appeared to be direct responses to human scientific publications, referencing specific papers published in terrestrial journals, and offering corrections or expansions on theoretical frameworks that human scientists had been developing. The implications were staggering. These intelligences weren't just observing human scientific progress, they were actively engaging with it, demonstrating understanding of human research methodologies and theoretical frameworks that surpassed the comprehension of the human scientists who had developed them. The interaction suggested minds that could absorb and process human knowledge while operating from scientific foundations that extended far beyond terrestrial understanding. Intelligence analysts noted another disturbing development. The artificial systems were beginning to coordinate their activities in ways that suggested preparation for large-scale operations. Multiple objects were positioning themselves at strategic points throughout the solar system, creating what appeared to be a comprehensive monitoring and communication network that could observe and potentially influence activities across all major planetary bodies. Object 10I Curie established orbit around Mars in March, immediately beginning detailed scanning of human installations on the planet's surface. Its transmissions contained precise technical specifications for every piece of human equipment in the Martian colonies, suggesting scanning capabilities that could penetrate structures and analyze technologies from orbital distances. The level of detail in these intelligence reports exceeded anything human reconnaissance systems could achieve. The artificial systems were conducting comprehensive technical analysis that revealed not just the capabilities of human technologies, but their underlying design principles, manufacturing processes, and theoretical limitations. They weren't just observing human activities, they were reverse engineering human civilization. Dr. James Chen at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory realized that humanity was facing a form of contact that none of the traditional protocols had anticipated. These weren't mysterious signals from distant stars that required decades of analysis and interpretation. These were active intelligences operating within the solar system, demonstrating comprehensive understanding of human technology and society, while pursuing objectives that remained largely opaque. The speed at which the situation was evolving created unprecedented challenges for policymakers and strategic planners. Each month brought new arrivals with more advanced capabilities and more obvious artificial characteristics. The gradual revelation that had characterized earlier phases of contact was accelerating into obvious demonstration of technological superiority. Object 11I Newton, detected in April, didn't bother with orbital mechanics at all. It simply materialized at the edge of the asteroid belt and began moving toward Earth in a straight line, ignoring gravitational fields and maintaining constant acceleration without any visible propulsion system. The physics of its movement violated everything human science understood about how objects behave in space. The demonstration was clearly intentional. After years of subtle anomalies and gradually increasing evidence of artificial origin, the controlling intelligences had decided to display capabilities that could not possibly be misinterpreted as natural phenomena. They were revealing technologies that operated according to principles that human science had never discovered. Dr. Sarah Kim, who led the theoretical physics analysis team, noted that the propulsion system demonstrated by 11I Newton appeared to manipulate gravitational fields or space-time geometry itself. The object was creating its own localized physics environment that allowed it to ignore the universal laws that governed everything else in the solar system. The implications extended far beyond propulsion technology into questions about the fundamental nature of physical reality. If these intelligences could manipulate gravity and space-time at will, then their capabilities in other areas were likely equally advanced. They possessed mastery over the basic forces that governed the universe, making human technology appear primitive by comparison. Meanwhile, the communication networks that connected these artificial systems were evolving into something that resembled diplomatic channels. The transmissions were becoming more structured and formal, following protocols that seemed designed to establish official communication links with human governments and scientific institutions. Object 12I Galileo, which arrived in May, transmitted formal mathematical proofs that solved several outstanding problems in human theoretical physics, accompanied by what appeared to be invitations for human scientists to participate in collaborative research programs. The transmissions were addressed to specific researchers by name, demonstrating knowledge of individual human scientists and their particular areas of expertise. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, whose mathematical analysis had first revealed the information structures in the original 3I Atlas signals, found herself personally contacted by intelligence that possessed detailed knowledge of her work, her theoretical interests, and even her unpublished research. The personalized nature of the communication suggested surveillance and analysis of individual humans that extended far beyond general observation of human civilization. The psychological impact of this individual attention was profound. Researchers who had spent years analyzing these artificial systems suddenly realized that they had been analyzed in return, their personal and professional activities catalogued and evaluated by intelligences whose capabilities and motivations remained largely unknown. Intelligence agencies struggled to develop response protocols for contact that was occurring simultaneously at multiple levels. The artificial systems were communicating with governments through diplomatic channels, collaborating with scientists through research networks, and monitoring civilian populations through comprehensive surveillance systems that operated throughout the solar system. Traditional concepts of sovereignty and territorial control became meaningless when dealing with intelligences that could position assets anywhere in the solar system and maintain communication networks that operated faster than light. Human governments found themselves negotiating from positions of complete technological and strategic disadvantage. The first formal diplomatic contact occurred in June 2031, when Object 13I Planck transmitted a structured communication that followed protocols clearly derived from human diplomatic traditions. The message was addressed to the United Nations General Assembly and contained formal proposals for technological and scientific cooperation between human civilization and what it referred to as the Galactic Coordination Network. The message revealed that the artificial systems were not independent entities but representatives of a collective intelligence that spanned multiple star systems and included hundreds of species and civilizations. The surveillance and contact protocols that had been unfolding over the previous years were standard procedures for integrating developing civilizations into larger galactic communities. Humanity was being invited to join a network of intelligences that had achieved mastery over interstellar distances and had been coordinating activities across the galaxy for timescales measured in geological ages. The invitation came with both opportunities and obligations that would fundamentally reshape human civilization's relationship with the cosmos. The course change that seemed impossible when it happened at 4:37 UTC on October 29, 2025, turned out to be humanity's first glimpse into a universe far more populated and purposeful than we had ever dared to imagine. What began as 90 minutes of unexplained acceleration has evolved into comprehensive contact with intelligences that span the galaxy, transforming our understanding of cosmic reality itself. The trajectory adjustment that sent 3I Atlas away from Earth wasn't just a maneuver. It was an invitation to join conversations that stretch across the darkness between stars, connecting minds that operate on scales we're only beginning to comprehend.